finding the right balance between security functions that are federated across business units and functions versus those that need to stay centralized. And finding that right balance is really key to building a scalable and effective security program.
This is a Security Weekly production. Security Weekly is a resource of Cyber Risk Alliance.
The Cybersecurity Collaborative and Wiz is proud to present CISO Stories. Each week, CISO Stories takes a deep dive on security leadership with one of the contributors to my latest book, the best-selling CISO Compass: Navigating Cybersecurity Leadership Challenges with Insights from Pioneers, as well as from other top CISOs and security thought leaders. The Cybersecurity Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/CSC or visit cyberleadersunite.com.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for this episode of CISO Stories. I'm Josh Dreyfus, Product Marketing at Wiz, and today I'm excited to be joined by our very own Wiz CISO, Ryan Kazanciyan. Today we're going to dive into how to think about cloud security from a cloud-native perspective and what Ryan has learned about that as a security leader. But before we do that, Ryan, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Josh. So hi, everybody. I'm Wiz's Chief Information Security Officer. In doing so, I lead our corporate product and infrastructure security initiatives, as well as risk and compliance. Previously, I was a security engineering lead at Meta, formerly known as Facebook, where I worked on a few different areas, including detection and response ops, WhatsApp and Messenger security strategy, and merger and acquisition security diligence. And prior to that, I was CTO at Tanium, an endpoint security-focused technology company. And before that, technical director at Mandiant, where I mainly focused in leading investigations for targeted breaches.
Fantastic. Well, it's great to have you here, Ryan, and I'm excited to chat with you.
Thanks.
So let's dive in. So to start out with, you said you're CISO at a cloud-native company. So what makes securing a Wiz cloud infrastructure distinctive or challenging?
Yeah, so our team's mission is probably similar to what a lot of CISOs at SaaS, especially security SaaS companies, establish, which is really focused on three simple things: protect our customers, protect our company and its people, and help make our product better. Specific to cloud technologies and our own cloud footprint, we're multi-cloud by design and necessity. And so first and foremost for me, in terms of my security program and capabilities, what that means is I need to prioritize coverage and consistency for our core security controls across all of the cloud environments in which we operate. Further on that, we rely on infrastructure and code. Our production infrastructure is largely immutable, and that provides a lot of security benefits, but it also increases the importance of security controls during CI/CD, the ability to maintain coverage across the deployed environments. And those are environments and systems that are being built and redeployed on a rapid ongoing basis. So rate of change is constant and steady. We need to be thoughtful about dependencies outside of cloud itself. Big ones on my mind are identity and access management, pathways from corporate to cloud. And finally, we're a startup still. We're relatively small. And so in doing all of these things I'm describing, especially for our cloud security, we have to be efficient. And we have to make the secure way, the easy way to do work across our small teams, because we don't have the massive resources of a huge company or the risk tolerance to constantly be in firefighting reactive mode.
Yeah, makes sense. Like for many companies, security is relatively understaffed compared to the amount that they have to cover. So no surprise there.
Yeah.
But so you mentioned this idea of being efficient. How does that affect how you prioritize security projects and the technologies you invest in?
Yeah, I think we just said security is often just finding that it's always playing catch up no matter what. And I think that's true for both small and big organizations. Efficiency can come from a lot of ways. I think one of the things I've learned over the years is security teams in evaluating solutions, be they commercial products, in-house projects, and in-house efforts, often will tend to overlook the long-term sustainability and supportability of what they design and build or procure in favor of depth of capability. And it's tough to find the right balance. But, if you think about different types of security solutions, things that rely on logging and monitoring, like you need mechanisms and resources to monitor signal quality and coverage. spot those silent failures or breaking changes that disrupt those log flows. If you're relying on agent technologies, you need to ensure they're fully deployed, that they're performant, that they're stable. And you have to do so as the workloads on the systems that they run on change. Where you rely on service providers, you have to understand where they do and do not cover things, how well they cover what they say they're doing, and test and validate that. And so all of these examples are functions that require headcount and technology. And if you're not a huge organization with like fleets of production or SRE resources that can do that type of work on a dedicated basis, you then have to figure out how to achieve that needed sustainability and supportability without huge dedicated teams. And so I think that especially means for smaller organizations that it's really important to think about supportability and the breadth of capability as a first-class citizen when evaluating any security project, thinking about sustainability really early in the design process. Otherwise, solutions end up getting procured or developed, stood up, and then rapidly degrade and rot. And that leaves organizations in a tough place with a lot of technical debt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So finding those ones that are a little bit more sustainable, scalable, more manageable as a company grows, as the team handles, different projects and doesn't require kind of constant hands-on maintenance. So you've had a wide range of security leadership experience. So, right now you're a Wiz. You mentioned also Meta and Tanium. What are some key things you've learned about the best ways to approach cloud security across, these very different companies?
Yeah, I think I've been fortunate in all that work to see the full range from huge big tech to older large enterprises to smaller startups. And there are a few commonalities. I think the things that I tend to find most interesting out of those experiences were finding the right balance between security functions that are federated across business units and functions versus those that need to stay centralized. And finding that right balance is really key to building a scalable and effective security program. And then secondly, thinking about how to incentivize engineers, be they focused on the application layer, focused on the cloud infrastructure layer, to invest the right amount of time and resources on security work and build that sort of partnership. I think both of those things are among the most important and challenging aspects of the role as a CISO.
Yeah, I'd love to talk a little bit more about actually each of those. So with that first idea, how do you think about which security functions should stay centralized versus which ones should be federated?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I've come around from having a very strong point of view in favor of one of those to realizing that you really do need flexibility and taking into account the fact that every organization's partner teams that are key to security, engineering, IT, legal, are going to be managed differently from company to company. And that's a huge factor in influencing whether security itself should be centralized or federated. So that organization size, there's a ton of considerations, but one of the principles that I think is useful to ground it is for a set of technology surfaces that you want a security team to work on, be it in a prevention mode, assurance mode, or in an operational response mode, is to look at how generalized or specialized your domain knowledge needed to do useful security work is going to be on those technology surfaces. So to take an example, especially earlier in my career, I spent a lot of time in end user environments in doing detection and response work in Windows and Mac OS. And the nice thing there is even though there are certainly differences in how the end user environment runs across companies, there are certain fundamental consistencies that once you've been in enough Windows or Mac OS enterprise fleets, you've basically seen it all. And so things are relatively consistent. And that means you can stand up central security teams to cover security in those surfaces relatively well. And the talent is widely available to do so, as well as the tooling. In cloud environments at an infrastructure level, there are similar level of commonalities, given how prolific the major CSPs especially Amazon, Azure, and GCP are. And so you find that consistency from org to org that's building on those platforms. And I think as a result, having centralized security teams doing tier one type operations in those cloud environments is feasible and is happening across industry today. But when you get deeper in the application stack or more specialized in the infrastructure stack, it gets really, really hard to expect a central siloed security team to understand all the context behind a particular incident or to be able to really prioritize a vulnerability deep in the stack and guide an engineering team on how to remediate it. And so I think that means ownership of certain security functions, especially in those environments, needs to at least follow a shared responsibility model, if not sitting closer to the teams doing the building and running of the infra and apps themselves. And in some cases, that may mean that there's a central team that comes in for support for escalations and guidance. But ideally, the federated and central teams are sharing a common set of tooling and using a common language, rather than solely relying on a central team with tooling that is expressly written just for a central security team alone. And so I think as you see that operating model and the need for a sort of blended mode of skills and responsibilities for security, more and more security products are going to be built for that universal audience, for engineers, for the builders, not just the security teams. And I think that's incredibly valuable.
The article this podcast is based upon can be viewed in the best-selling cybersecurity leadership book, CISO Compass, Navigating Cybersecurity Leadership Challenges with Insights from Pioneers.
Yeah. And I mean, it's almost a bit of a trope, the idea of, development teams and security teams having friction or not being as focused on security. So from the security side perspective, with these things that need to be federated, that need to be closer to some of these development teams, how do you incentivize engineers to work effectively with you and your team?
Yeah, it's. I think every org I've ever worked with has found this challenging in different ways. The first is early engagement, building a collaborative relationship between the security teams and the infrastructure and application engineering teams, and setting the expectation that security is not there to provide a rubber stamp, blocking things from shipping or saying yes, like, okay, fine, checkbox, move things along without actually providing actual value or scrutiny. And so that early engagement also means understanding shared priorities, and then building champions that are willing and eager to sort of be the lighthouses for security support across the partner teams. It also can help establish a shared understanding of prioritization. It's valuable for security teams to understand what's most important for engineering teams that are trying to build and deploy. And it's also important for those engineering teams to understand when security teams escalate certain issues, why they're doing so, and how they can trust that they're actually important to the security of the organization. Having a shared language, I touched on this earlier, but shared platforms and shared tooling can be really valuable there. Security teams using engineers tooling for raising issues, engineering teams sharing security tooling with the security team that gives them the same insight into the risks that they're identifying so that they're collaboratively working from the same sets of data is incredibly useful. It builds trust. It also just makes that collaboration more efficient. And then finally, finding the right incentives. I think security is just one of many forms of quality that engineering teams need to be mindful of. And so finding how are engineering teams incentivized today and working with leadership to tie security as part of those incentives, to find the metrics that show it's a worthwhile investment. To take one example, take a class of security risks that end up being manifested in constant incident response, take the time and effort around engineering supporting those incident response efforts and figure out what would have been recoverable time had there been better root cause prevention. And then using those metrics to justify look, this is the actual time saved by preventing rather than responding after the fact. So I think these are all tools that can help build that collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely. On the subject of metrics, and thinking about Wiz, thinking about kind of cloud native companies, what types of more executive level metrics are you developing and sharing around Wiz's cloud security posture, and how are you thinking about what a state of good?
Yeah, I'll caveat this by saying I feel like I'm by no means an expert in metrics and measurement, and I heavily rely on guidance from a lot of peers in industry who are really brilliant at this. But I think in many cases, you can take some fundamentals that are valuable for looking at cloud security posture, but also are just generally true for any technology surface. And so to start with a few that I think are useful, coverage is something I talked about earlier, breadth and depth. So in a cloud environment, that means you've got a set of capabilities. What types of environments are they applied to today? Your development environments, your various segments of staging or production. And then across your cloud environments, do you have a set of capabilities that's consistent across all of the different cloud service providers that you leverage, a subset of them? And then finally, within each of those providers, are the capabilities comprehensive across the types of infrastructure and assets, or are there gaps there? And no solution is perfect. And so You look for like among the technology stacks that you rely upon, what is the Venn diagram? What are the areas that at least have one or two good solutions providing coverage, and where are the outright gaps? So that's one. The second is where and when risks are being identified. So if you think about like the spectrum from left to right, there's identifying risks at the design and threat modeling stage, pre-deployment, security review, post-deployment, and then worst of all, post-incident. And ideally, as you start to look at where we're finding out about risks, you start to find that you're identifying more and more earlier on in the process. And that's a good signal that you're catching issues before they actually make their way to production, and that you've got a good, healthy ecosystem. You never reach 100%, but you hopefully at least shift categories of risks further and further left over time. Adjacent to that is also how you're identifying risks. So even when it's an incident, there's things that you figure out on your own with your own teams that is exposed or vulnerable or otherwise in a less desirable security state. There's risks you identify from a friendly third party. Maybe it's a bug bounty submission. And then there's risks you identify from hostile third parties, like you got hacked, or a regulator or auditor caught something that you were supposed to be doing and didn't. And that's, of course, the worst way to identify that you have a risk in your environment. And so again, when you look at the preponderance of where your findings are coming from, the more you're self-identifying, the better. And finally, like efficiency, talked about this a little earlier, but looking at your security headcount as a ratio of coverage across the scale at which your organization and engineering is building is a useful way to say, like, okay, how is security headcount scaling as a proportion of engineering across AppSec, across InfoSec? And what does that tell you about the capabilities and the extent to which you've built self-service platforms? So I think that's one way of getting interesting metrics on scale. Another way is looking at the ratio of time spent on prevention work versus time spent on response work. And again, I think one of the reasons a lot of security orgs feel perpetually behind is they're just constantly in firefighting mode. And pulling data around that is often a compelling way of showing where investments need to be made on the prevention side to reclaim not just security's time, but everyone's time in the company on doing prevention in areas that are going to matter most.
Yeah, those all seem like very smart areas to spend time to focus on. Reporting not just the idea of like vanity metrics, but things that actually can move the needle and that are showing and giving actual real insight into areas where it's worth investing. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I love that term, vanity metrics. I think, the classic, like how many alerts did we have this month are perfect examples of that sort of thing that don't really tell you a whole lot.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So switching tacks a little bit here, but it's a challenging and competitive job market for security talent, right? So any advice on how you approach recruiting and developing cloud security experts in particular?
Yeah, absolutely right. It's a very, very competitive market. And I think especially with how young most cloud technologies are, you're drawing from an even narrower pool. And it's true for any subset. Like if you're looking for cloud security experts who have done threat modeling and design and assurance work, that's a smaller pool than the overarching set of people who have done what you'd call product security work. Same on the detection and response space. The people who have done forensics, incident response, detection engineering, and cloud native environments, much smaller subset than the overarching pool of people who have done detection and response in general. And so that means you've I think, got to be creative and look beyond just pure security practitioners. What I have found in past work is that people in software engineering domains, and especially people who have done DevOps or SRE type work, often have skills that are immensely transferable to security, both from the ability to think like a software engineer in terms of what design and development and deployment are and how useful that is when you need to partner with engineering on security work, but also the fact that a lot of security work is not actually all that different from reliability engineering. The big difference is you, instead of like fighting gremlins in the system or like edge cases from large scale activity or events or other things that cause performance challenges, you're dealing with motivated bad actors. And that's certainly a different lens on reliability engineering, but at the same time, like you're still trying to solve for the same problems around prevention, around good observability, just applied to a slightly different lens in security. And so, circling back to the original premise, I think finding people with that type of SRE, DevOps, software engineering background that are motivated to pivot into security and apply their skills in a slightly different area, they often do really well with a bit of mentorship and oversight and guidance and have a really quick ramp up time. So I think that's one of the many ways that we can help address the so-called skill shortage that is prolific around security.
Yeah. It's a really interesting perspective of that transition, finding those skills or those ways of working that can be applied really well to a slightly different space and help fill some of those gaps. Well, Ryan, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for your time and for discussing your views and learnings here. It's been fantastic.
Really appreciate it. Thanks a lot, Josh. I enjoyed it as well.
Wiz is on a mission to help every organization rapidly identify and remove critical risks in their cloud environments. Purpose-built for the cloud, Wiz delivers full-stack visibility, accurate risk prioritization, and enhanced business agility. Wiz connects in minutes using an agentless approach that scans both platform configurations and inside every workload. We perform a deep assessment that goes beyond what standalone CSPM and CWPP tools offer to find the toxic combination of flaws that represent real risk. To learn more about Wiz, please visit securityweekly.com/Wiz.